Hi, I'm Mike Shapiro from Cornell University. My co-author, Melissa Seipel, is just starting a new job at Brigham Young University and is unable to be with us today. Antiheros, sometimes known as morally ambiguous characters, have always been part of storytelling, at least going back to ancient Greece, but have been getting increasing social scholarly attention, perhaps in part because of the popularity of shows exploring very complex characters such as Tony Soprano or Daenerys Targaryen on Game of Thrones. Defining an anti-hero can be challenging, but typically they are defined as protagonists who have both some admirable characteristics and behaviors, but who sometimes do bad or questionable things, or villains who have redeemable qualities or motivations. Interest in antiheroes has emerged both in the media psychology literature and in film and television studies. Media psychology depends on audience studies, usually experiments and statistical modeling of surveys. Film and television studies depend mostly on text analysis and/or case studies. Starting in the 1970s, affective disposition theory became the basis for media psychology's understanding of story characters. Disposition theory argued that audiences enjoyed good outcomes for moral characters and bad outcomes for immoral characters. In recent years, there have been several modifications and extensions. For example, Oliver and colleagues explored other viewing motivations, such as appreciation. In addition, enjoyment has been linked to variables such as identification, liking, and empathy, and to audience motives and characteristics. However, in these studies, the focus has been on a limited battery of engagement variables as outcomes that may not reflect some important ongoing audience processes. For example, what happens as a story unfolds and a character changes. Overall, media psychology has built an impressive body of empirical data, but it may be limited by a narrow view of which variables are important. Film and television studies depend more on analytical approaches in text analysis. Particularly in recent years, these analyses have put forward some intriguing ideas about the complex ways a story might engage an audience. In particular, Smith's structure of sympathy suggests ways that audiences develop allegiances to complex story characters over a story arc. For example, Tony Soprano is a criminal and a murderer. Why then do most audience members fear for Tony and want him to survive this episode?
Daddy, where is he? Please let him be all right. They didn't say anything when they called. They didn't.
Smith's structure of sympathy posits some interesting ideas about how this might work. One possibility is that audiences form partial allegiances with characters, even characters who are immoral, as audience members become familiar with the character over time. Storytelling techniques can influence these allegiances. For example, in the Soprano clip, Tony is pitted against even worse characters who are less familiar to the audience. Also, a positive side of Tony is primed by Tony's family, who are concerned about him. To explore how audiences process an antihero, we asked participants in 3 studies to consider a familiar antihero and report their memory of how they thought about that character over time. In all 3 studies, we asked participants to come to the study with an antihero in mind, according to the definition you see here. This definition is based on those used in several studies of antiheroes and morally ambiguous characters. Almost all participants chose antiheroes who featured in a film or TV series, with only a few choosing antiheroes that featured in only a single film. This allowed us to tap into long-term engagement processes and in-depth knowledge and experiences each participant had with their chosen character. The 3 studies included focus groups, in-depth interviews, and a thought listing study. Keep in mind that focus group participants each brought their own anti-hero to the group, so several different characters were discussed in each group. This provided an opportunity for participants to explain their character and ask questions about and comment on other characters. At the beginning of each focus group question, each member briefly introduced their chosen character, and all group members were encouraged to comment on any of the characters discussed in the group. We asked focus group members to discuss what stands out about a character, what is important to the anti-hero's relationships, the character's challenges, and when they didn't understand a character's actions. The in-depth interviews were semi-structured individual interviews. Participants were asked to cover much the same ground as the focus groups. 3 additional prompts and questions were added to explore themes and experiences that arose during the focus groups, including how participants worked through difficult moments with the character and how participants negotiated allegiances with the character. Thought listing is designed to access mental processes by capturing content that passes through a person's short-term memory during an experience, or, as in this case, while recalling, reflecting, or engaging retrospectively with a previous experience. It's well established that thought lists should ask participants to report what they think and feel, not why they have those thoughts and feelings. This produces descriptive responses that accurately reflect what's passing through the participant's mind in that moment, and avoids participant theories, which often do not reflect participants' actual thought processes. Our goal was for participants to tell us about their experience with their character. We wanted to allow patterns and meaning to emerge, whether they fit our preconceptions or not. By focusing on participant experience, we wanted to avoid participants' theories of how they processed characters. The literature is clear that people's theories and introspections about how or why they did something are often wrong. To analyze the focus groups and in-depth interviews, we used the constant comparative method, which I'm sure is familiar to many of you. To analyze the thought listing study, we used theme analysis. Each study built on the previous study, adjusting interview guides for the next study and adding new codes as they emerged. Analysis continued until we reached a saturation point, a point where findings tended to repeat and reinforce rather than generate new findings. While there were differences between the studies, they were not contradictory. The differences reinforced and added to the other studies. Our main conclusion was that participants were focused on understanding a character. We also gained some interesting insights into the process of rooting for a character and for how participants incorporated the different sides of a character into their understanding of a character. Also, participants understood that how a character represented themselves and the character's true nature could be different. Much of what participants seemed to do was form a complex understanding of a character to understand how and why that character thought and behaved as they did, and how that changed as the story unfolds. This seems different than much of the media psychology work that struggles with how audiences deal with immoral behavior. Audience members did not necessarily need to agree with, accept, or support a character and their behavior. In our study, the focus was mostly on understanding the full complexity of a character rather than agreement or somehow accepting immoral behavior. The notion of rooting for a character arose unprompted in the first two studies and was probed in the thought listing study. While participants often rooted for a character's success, that did not mean blind support. Often participants wanted or hoped for something better from the character. Many participants rooted for characters that they did not fully approve of. This was linked to forming partial allegiances to a character. Our study found at least one interesting strategy that participants used to negotiate these partial allegiances. Each character had multiple roles and multiple characteristics. Participants seemed to negotiate this in part by matching a characteristic to a role. This finding was unexpected. Participants often attributed character traits to specific roles, not usually realizing they were doing this. This helped participants negotiate mixed feelings toward a character, rooting for a character in some roles, but not others. This also contributed to a complex multidimensional understanding of a character, making sense of seemingly contradictory characteristics in a character. Dexter could be a loving father while being a psychopathic murderer. Any positive role helped participants form an allegiance with and root for a character. Related to this was the recognition of a character's multiple sides or layers. Most participant descriptions of an antihero's complexities revolved around ambiguities about which persona was genuine. Participants were able to recognize clues that a character's surface attitudes and actions were not always representative of other sides of the character. These ambiguities were often unresolved, but true colors were often revealed in intense and/or life and death situations. These true colors could be complex. For example, Jaime Lannister's choice to die with his sister and lover Cersei at the end of Game of Thrones. New information can dramatically change how the audience thinks of a character. What Harry and the audience discover about Snape's and his motivations at the end of Harry Potter dramatically changes how Harry and audience members think about Snape's, his murder of Dumbledore, and his relationship to Harry and his mother. Several other themes emerged. For example, characters were embedded in the story that unfolded over time and had relationships with other characters. These relationships influenced the character's behavior and affected what participants thought about a character. Our results indicate that audiences have complex relationships with antiheroes in the context of a story and develop a complex understanding of a character. Audiences consider an antihero's traits, states of mind, actions, relationships, and contexts. Audience engagement with antiheroes are complex dynamic processes to understand and develop supportive, unsupportive, or mixed opinions and stances toward an antihero. And as the story unfolds, audiences can reconsider their judgment. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about this research.